If you could be relatively healthy and have a sharp mind, would you want to live to be 100? Chances are at least a couple of you in this room will reach your century mark.
By the year 2050, it's estimated that there will be over 800,000 centenarians living in the United States. What if one of them was you? Whether or not you've had the opportunity to meet a centenarian or not, haven't you ever wondered what their lifestyle was like, how they lived, and what they ate? Well, as a nutrition researcher and a dietitian specializing in gerontology, we wondered. So we asked, and we heard stories, and we drew conclusions.
Our road to 100 took us places far and wide, cities small and large, so right over from Nampa, Idaho, to Hiroshima, Japan, from Singapore to Cuba to Sardinia, Italy. And SeAnne and I had some evidence-based type questions we were going to ask the centenarians, and we did. But the answers we got were sometimes unexpected and often funny. But through it all, some common nutrition themes emerged. Centenarians grew their own food or knew where their food came from. They thanked their God every day for what they had to put in their mouth. Sometimes they didn't have much. Food was scarce, or there were times of starvation. But the food they had, they shared with family and friends. Centenarians worked hard, often to physical exhaustion. They had structure in their meals and their dining. They ate very little sugar and even less meat. And the thing we're going to spend the majority of the time talking to you about today is centenarians eat vegetables, lots and lots of vegetables. So please join us on our road to 100 as we blend the science and stories of centenarians and their vegetables. So the very first person we interviewed was Regina. And 100-year-old Regina had some centenarian secrets for us. And the first one was obvious because we came in to meet her. She was holding her hot, freshly brewed cup of black coffee. And so Regina told us that coffee had been important for her whole life, whether it was driving the big truck or feeding farmhands or dealing with her 9 kids. But that's where the caffeine ended and the vegetables began. So Regina's from Idaho, and she wanted us to share that potatoes were her favorite. But she also grew a wide variety of vegetables her entire life in gardens. She ate vegetables pretty much for every meal. And so whether they were fresh or frozen, dehydrated or canned, she ate vegetables, lots of them. And so she actually chuckled when she said to us, "Ladies, I've preserved a lot of vegetables in my day. Maybe that's why I'm preserved too."
Veggies, we love them. But we've had it wrong all of these years calling the food group fruits and vegetables. It really should be vegetables and fruit, with an emphasis on vegetables. Looking at the chronic diseases that keep us from reaching our 100th birthday, we see heart disease, stroke, diabetes, cancer, and even Alzheimer's disease top the list. But there's convincing evidence that diets high in vegetables can prevent these chronic diseases. If we look at some of the longest and largest nutrition studies, we see that those who ate 5 servings of vegetables or more per day had a 30% less chance of having a heart disease or stroke. We also know that 35% of cancers are related to diet. And we also know that if diets high in vegetables can help lower blood pressure, and in some cases to the point where no medication is needed. So, what does the science say? Well, we know that food is medicine. But if we specifically look at foods related to disease, we see that for heart disease and Alzheimer's disease, leafy green vegetables are very important. And we're talking about spinach, kale, romaine lettuce, those types of things. For cancer, we know that the cruciferous vegetables, which are broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, are incredibly important, as well as the bright-colored vegetables, the oranges and the yellows that contain the carotenoids. Also, we know that for men, lycopene, which is a phytochemical found in tomatoes, is important and may be beneficial in preventing prostate cancer. So, the last thing we know about vegetables is that those who consume large amounts of vegetables have a healthier body weight. And we know that a healthier body weight means less obesity, less type 2 diabetes, and less Alzheimer's disease.
103-year-old Dr. Antonio Cadoni didn't appear to have a problem with Alzheimer's disease. When he first entered the room for our interview, he had his vintage three-piece suit and he was using his cane, and SeAnne and I thought maybe we'd be dealing with a feeble old man. Nothing was further from the truth. He had the mental clarity, vision, and hearing of someone half his age. So Dr. Cadoni talked to us about how he felt a secret to his long life was consistency with what he ate every day. He also introduced us to a term that was new to us, cibi genuini. And of course that sounds new because it was Italian, right? But it's genuine foods. So in his community in Sardinia, Italy, Dr. Cadoni had only eaten fresh, local, in-season produce. And so he actually lectured us a little bit and said, why would anyone put something in their mouth if they didn't know where it came from? So in my best Italian, mangiare cibi genuini,
which means eat genuine foods. So over the last decade, we have seen a change or a lot of public concern regarding our food production methods, our food origin, and food safety. And it's really changed the landscape of how consumers shop. There's much more demand for local foods, and well, there should be, because local food is better for you. The shorter the time from the farm to the table, the higher the nutrient content. But did you also know that local food helps promote genetic diversity? And if you think about this, large-scale operations select food for production based upon their ability, the food's ability to ripen uniformly, withstand packaging, withstand transportation, and sit on the shelf for a long period of time. If you contrast that to local farms, we see that food at the local farm level is genetically diverse because they want food to last and extend for the whole harvest season.
SeAnne and I got to see a lot of farms because we drove down the center of Sardinia to this little town to visit the famous Mellis family. So the Mellises became famous in the Guinness Book of World Records for the highest combined age of living siblings. And they also were studied in the blue zones from around the world. And unfortunately, a couple months prior to our arrival, the 108-year-old sibling had passed away. But we did get to meet 4 of the remaining 8 living siblings, with Claudina being the eldest at 103. So Claudina, delightful, you can tell by the picture, smile from ear to ear, and she was so fun. And her family said that she'd been extra spunky that morning. Got out of bed a little earlier than normal because the Americans are coming. And she was super excited to have us there. And so we got the opportunity to ask her what she felt she ate through her life that helped her to get to 103. And she broke into song, literally, fagioli, patata. So beans and potatoes, 2 of the ingredients that were the backbone of the minestrone soup that was written up in the blue zone. So along with olive oil, garlic, and onion, beans and potatoes made up that backbone. SeAnne and I really feel there's more to this story, and the secret is in the perpetual nature of their soup. So depending on what was coming out in that harvest or that time of year, those crops, the face of that soup changed. Could change, throughout the year, various times, and up to 20 different vegetables might be in the soup. So Claudina shared with us that she'd had soup that morning for breakfast, and maybe she was going to have soup for lunch and dinner too. So we wonder, and perhaps you'll wonder too, does the perpetual nature of that soup lead to this family's seemingly perpetual lives?
Soup making might just be the new juicing. Soup, the new trend. Soup contains the pulp, the rind, the seeds, and the skin that juicing often discards. That's good news for those of you who don't like salads. So we know from the research that those who consume soup prior to a meal tend to eat about 20% less, meaning soup fills you up and you eat less. We also know that most soups are plant-based, and plant-based diets are low-risk, cost-effective ways to prevent chronic disease. So, healthcare providers should recommend plant-based diets to most of their patients, especially those who have chronic disease risk factors. We're talking about diets such as the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet. But a plant-based diet doesn't necessarily mean a vegetarian diet. It means a diet where the majority of your plate is filled with nutrient-dense plant foods with minimum serving sizes of processed foods, animal foods, and fats and oils.
So the very moment that we saw Tommy, we had to wonder if maybe she'd eaten a plant-based diet all her life, or what was it that she did to have her complexion be so beautiful. So we thought, well, through the translator, we'll ask, Tommy, is there something that you do to have your skin be so radiant? And Tommy said, yes. Every morning, I get up and I do the same thing. And so we're like prepped, right? We are so excited about this. I put on makeup. But Tommy truly did have centenarian diet secrets to share with us. Tommy survived the Hiroshima bomb. She had cancer 3 times and was living to her 100th birthday. So she described her garden as her lifeline. And not necessarily the fresh foods coming out of the garden, but the foods that were fermented. So every day of her life, whether it was the cabbage turned into kimchi, or the eggplant or the cucumbers that were fermented, Tommy had a fermented food every day, sometimes more often than that. And she said that's what sustained her.
So fermented foods have been around for a long time. Wine and beer fermentation were ways of ensuring safe drinking water. And fermented foods were the preservation method used to make sure that vegetables lasted all year round. So this has been around for a long time. In the fermentation process, bacteria is introduced to the food that breaks it down, and it also introduces something we call probiotics. And probiotics, we're just beginning to not only be able to identify different strains of probiotics, we're also being able to, through research, understand the benefits of probiotics in our trillions of gut microorganisms that we have in our stomach. So we know that probiotics are important in protecting our immune system. We know that they're important in preventing diarrhea and constipation. And the newest emerging research talks about probiotics as being important in insulin resistance, and that is very important for preventing type 2 diabetes. So what types of foods are we talking about with fermentation, and how often should we eat them? Well, foods that are listed up here, but the most common ones you probably already are eating: yogurt with live cultures, sauerkraut, that has been refrigerated or homemade because you want to keep the bacteria alive. And you'll notice a trend in the grocery stores for kombucha. It's everywhere these days. So those are some of the 3 most common, and it's recommended a daily dose of those.
So over a glass of delicious fermented red wine, SeAnne and I got to meet 2 amazing gentlemen, both named Michael, both shepherds in Italy. One was the shepherd of goats, and one a sheep herd. And these gentlemen talked about how they had hard times in their lives, where they would maybe leave for a week at a time with only a loaf of bread and a chunk of pecorino cheese. And they had to forage off the land. They had to find ways to survive. And so they learned what plants they could and couldn't eat. And Michael N. was particularly funny because he had the goat herd, and he said, I just watch my goats. And if the goats won't eat it, damned if I would eat it. So we laughed like that too, and it actually allowed us the opportunity to ask them about wine or vino in their diet. And Michael S., he was quick to raise his hand and tell us how he felt that's what helped him live to be a strong, older man. And he said, remember, water is for washing. Vino is for drinking.
Wine. Should we drink the wine or shouldn't we drink the wine? And what does the research say? I know everybody wants to walk out of here knowing the answer to that question. Well, we know that with inflammation, wine is linked to inflammation, and we know that with heart disease and dementia and Alzheimer's disease, the body has an inflammatory response. So, drinking wine, which has the polyphenol, which is a phytochemical. It has a polyphenol, red wine, in it called resveratrol. And resveratrol is a very, very important anti-inflammatory. So drinking 1 to 2 glasses of vino per day may not be a bad thing. But there's also anti-inflammatory components in plants, vegetables in particular, and nuts and seeds. And if you look at the research, you will find time and time again, leafy green vegetables come up over and over again as being particularly protective. So we're not here to tell you how to incorporate vegetables into your diets, but we are here to encourage you to do it. And if you don't listen to science, and if you don't listen to 2 dietitians, perhaps you'll listen to the centenarians.
So as you can see, we got to meet some really amazing centenarians, actually over 20. And through those interviews, we discovered and confirmed that vegetables were important to reduce chronic disease risk and increase the chance of living to be 100. So whether or not you're one of those people in the room that's going to reach your century mark, or maybe you just want to have the end of your years be as healthy as possible, we wanted to leave you with these centenarian takeaways. We also feel like Regina, at 100 years old, said it best when she said, to live to 100, you must have a purpose in life, love your God, and eat your vegetables.
Thank you
Thank you very much.